I want to start with a number of thank yous, especially to our speakers, musicians, organizers, the deacons and other aspects of our security team, the AV, the culinary arts, the church staff, and also for the denominational administrators that have made this weekend doable. I also want to thank everyone who had the courage to write or call me and talk to me directly about any encouragement or concerns they had for this weekend. For indeed, this is the way of Christ. Much has been mentioned over the last few months about Leviticus 19 and the quote of Jesus, to love your neighbor as yourself. But the entire context of that message is this: you should not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but you shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. In other words, God is calling us to talk out and to live out the love of Jesus. The goal of this weekend is fourfold. Number one, to strengthen Christians in a biblical understanding of the issues of conscience and coercion. Number two, to understand and enable the individual to be responsible and proactive in protecting both his own and her own, along with the community health. Number three, to inform regarding issues of legality and exemption in regards to government or employer compulsion of force, which are often referred to as mandates, and to address the insecurity and imbalance of our postmodern media world, which has resulted in the oppression of free speech and discussion regarding issues of paramount importance to the personal and civic health of our country and its citizens. We believe that the metrics of mental health, social well-being, educational advancement, and economic realities on a national and individual level, including the fundamental right to livelihood, require an honest and full-spectrum approach. We believe that the overt or covert threatenings of licensure and suppression of medical discussion is an unmeasured catastrophe of the past 15 months. To be clear, the emphasis of this weekend is informed consent. These are two concepts that protect the health and the well-being of individuals and nations. Unfortunately, the current media landscape makes a proper understanding of informed consent very difficult. Navigating between news agencies and websites sifting for the truth can be overwhelming. Perhaps we should not be surprised that this is not an entirely new situation. The life and times of Jesus were surrounded by similar circumstances. The stewards of cultural messaging were unsettled by the organic popularity of this grassroots messianic movement. Eventually, the boldness of the Sanhedrin knew no bounds, and it exercised itself in a mandate for all who knew of the whereabouts of Jesus to report it for his subsequent arrest. That can be found in Luke 11:57. What's unusual about this situation is that right when the Pharisees and Sadducees felt powerful enough to reach out and take control and declare Jesus an outlaw, the triumphal entry was just around the corner by a few days, and the masses would declare him their hero. But before the week ended, Jesus was in their grasp and headed for the cross. Only one man stood between the Christ and his crucifixion, and that was the Roman governor. And now, we, like Pilate, are compelled to ask, what is truth? The answer was not so dependent on the words of Jesus as it was the character of the questioner. And I want you to think about that. The essence of all truth stood in the presence of one that was more righteous than the Pharisees and Sadducees who had brought him there. And yet his heart was not set on truly following truth. John, the gospel writer, announces that the light shone in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. One is compelled to ask, How can such things be? The unfolding answer of his gospel is the story of self-imposed blindness to Jesus the Messiah, who was the light of the world. This is a condition from which it is almost impossible to recover. In other words, truth is a function of the heart in desire more than it is a set of data. And while we are scientific and believe in the pursuit of data, we understand that it is all interpreted. And that interpretation might depend on character and courage as much as anything else. For as much as information matters in times like these, the spirit of a man or a woman of truth recognizes and responds to the spirit of truth even before it can completely analyze and evaluate the subject matter at hand. In other words, birds of a feather will indeed flock together, and there is something to be said about wanting to hear the truth before you can see and accept the truth. If a mind is a priori decided, if it is of an opinion unchangeable, then we're back to the age-old adage, don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up. This element of character will be central as a dividing and deciding issue at the end of times. In The Great Controversy, the author describes a situation in the last days when the examination of data will yield only partial benefit to its examiner. Genuine miracles and demonic deceptions of the same nature will have flooded the landscape of planet Earth. On page 612, this is what she writes. Servants of God, with their faces lighted up and shining with holy consecration, will hasten from place to place to proclaim the message from heaven. By thousands of voices all over the earth, the warning will be given. Miracles will be wrought, the sick will be healed, and signs and wonders will follow the believers. But there is a problem. Satan also works with lying wonders, even bringing down fire from heaven in the sight of men, according to Revelation 13:13. Thus the inhabitants of the earth will be brought to take their stand. At some level, how unfortunate that the data will be all over the board and indisputable at some level. It will be a competing narrative with competing interpretations, and a competing set of data will be before every human being. And with a complete chokehold on the venues of communication, God's people will be reduced to face-to-face and in-person giving of the final message of warning and hope. Why is this? It appears that now, as of old and in the future, the Spirit of truth must connect with a person of truth in order for it to be recognizable. And of course, where we start and where we finish may be very different, like the Apostle Paul, formerly as Saul, who was an enemy of the gospel and then its greatest proponent. And just like today, at the very end, everyone will be freighted with the responsibility of making their own decision, of recognizing the Spirit of truth, even if they can't crunch all the data. The Spirit of truth is humble, which allows for dialogue and examination. It is respectful, which critiques ideas and not people. It is patient because it understands the eventual triumph of right. It is courageous, knowing the rarity and fragility of liberty. It is bold, which is without fear and trusting the source of all truth. And it is willing to suffer, to experience the cost of intellectual and spiritual integrity in an age of darkness and oppression. When Solomon was confronted with the mystery of the harlot mothers, he faced a similar situation. Before summoning the soldier and the sword, he surveyed the character of the women before him. One was coarse and calloused, one was heartbroken and grieving. The contrived appearance of an execution was simply an amplification of the impress of the spirit of the true mother on the king. Solomon was taking a calculated risk, but not too much of a risk, for he knew that real love would suffer. The real mother would rather look into the eyes of her own child in the arms of an evil woman and grieve day after day than to see its lifeless form on the palace floor. And Solomon said, give her the child, she's the real mother. This weekend is designed to help honest people make informed choices. This weekend is in harmony with the voted policy of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as published in the Adventist Review, and it desires to protect and respect the pursuit of truth. All questions for the weekend have been submitted prior to the event. The speakers will not be available for personal consultation. References and materials will be available on our website at the conclusion of the event. We solicit your prayers and appeal to the nobility of Christ that the weekend may proceed as a model for honest and respectful dialogue. Let us pray. Lord, I'm praying now, Lord, that your Spirit would descend on this body, on those watching online, and that we would be people of truth. May we be willing to change our minds, alter our opinions, and follow that truth wherever it leads. This is the Protestant way. It has been the Adventist way. And liberty has been protected through the sacrifice of many to keep us in that way. So now, Lord, bless our speakers, bless our listeners, take the message wherever it should go, and please protect our church from mirroring some of the proclivities of a postmodern generation. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. I'd like to invite a dear friend of mine, but not relative, Dr. John Kelly, to come up. John is a physician that has assisted many in discovering a better life through lifestyle. He is the founder of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I won't give his full bio tonight. He will be on the panel tomorrow, but we've asked him to introduce Dr. McCullough.
Thank you. It is my privilege, actually, to introduce a medical colleague I've just met in person this evening, but already been blessed by the time we spent together. Dr. Peter McCullough. He's an internist, a cardiologist, an epidemiologist, and has been professor of medicine at multiple universities, medical universities. I say that, I'll explain that wording in just a minute. He maintains board certification in internal medicine and cardiovascular disease medicine, and he practices both internal medicine and including the management of common infectious diseases as well as cardiovascular complications. Dr. McCullough has been a leader in the medical response and treatment and has published papers on this entitled Pathophysiological Basis and Rationale for Early Outpatient Treatment of Infection. It's the first synthesis of sequenced multi-drug treatment of ambulatory patients published in the American Journal of Medicine and subsequently updated in January this year in Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. Dr. McCullough has 46 peer-reviewed publications on the infection and has commented extensively on the medical response in the national media. On November 19 of 2020, Dr. McCullough testified in the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and throughout 2021, this year, in the Texas Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, the Colorado General Assembly, New Hampshire Senate, concerning many aspects of the response. I know from our conversation that this list is much longer than that. In fact, the short time we were talking this evening, he had multiple contacts and interaction, people of this nature, contacting him and asking for information, etc. So Dr. McCullough has had a full year of dedicated academic and clinical efforts in combating the virus, and in doing so has reviewed thousands of reports, participated in scientific congresses, group discussions, press releases, and is considered among the world's experts. So I just want to thank you, Dr. McCullough, for coming. Thank you for standing for principle.
Well, thanks for the introduction, and thanks to each and every one of you for attending. I don't know how I can stand up to that introduction, but I do have to say, I think it is an amazing time to be alive right now. You know, for better or for worse, and it's been the worst for a lot of us. It's been the worst. It is, something is going on right now in the world, and in our little part of the world here in Michigan. I lived in Michigan a long time, that everyone has to recognize that this is really different than all the other years of our lives. And I'll never forget when this started, and we were having these press briefings, and Trump was getting up there and saying, you know, if we just get to Easter, it's going to be over with. And I was, when this first hit, you know, I didn't really follow the SARS-1 pandemic very much, but I talked to a couple of my colleagues in Canada who I knew. I said, you guys were hit by SARS. How long did this last? I mean, we are wearing these smothering N95 masks. He goes, oh, we had to wear N95s for about 90 days and it was over with. And I said, oh, Trump's pretty good. 90 days, it'll be Easter, it'll be over with. Boy, was that wrong, huh? So, as introduced, I'm an internist and cardiologist. I'm an academic physician my entire life, but I see and examine patients every day. I'm the editor-in-chief of 2 major journals, Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine and Cardiorenal Medicine. I'm the president of Cardiorenal Society of America, so as you may get an idea, I study the interface between heart and kidney disease. And as part of my lifetime, I came to Michigan in 1991. And I was on a rural health supported program. I was up in Grayling. I covered medicine with Chuck Wilkinson, who came from Duke. I came from University of Washington. I trained at Baylor in Texas and then UT Southwestern. I did my residency at University of Washington in Seattle, so I was really gunning away. Chuck, my partner, had trained at Duke. We were recruited to come up to Grayling, and we covered Grayling, Roscommon County, and we covered down to Gladwin and over to Kalkaska. You know, we were kind of back in the early 90s, there was a physician shortage up north, and so we went up there in order to get our student loans paid back, and we got great experience. Most people did, I feel like I'm echoing a bit, most of us did service and after residency back then, so it was not uncommon. In Seattle, a lot of our residents became CDC officers, which is interesting now since we interact so much with the CDC. But after that, I went to, that'll probably do it. After that, I went to University of Michigan School of Public Health, and I got my degree in epidemiology, and went on and trained at Beaumont Hospital in cardiology, which is now Beaumont School of Medicine. And I had leadership positions here in Michigan for a long time. I was division chief at William Beaumont, and I was the chief academic scientific officer for all of Ascension Health up here before I returned to Texas to finish my career at Baylor. And I had been focusing on chronic diseases. I realized that this was our medical Super Bowl. And it didn't take me too long to figure this out. I said, listen, something is big happening. This is probably bigger than anything any doctor had seen. And while I was trying to process what was going on, we had a calamity up here in our family. My wife's cousin, her daughter, Kim, was working at a CVS in Livonia as a pharmacist early in March. And back then, there were no masks, and probably people didn't know what was going on. Kim was 7 months pregnant, and she came down with a fever, had trouble breathing, goes to the University of Michigan, delivers the baby at 7 months precipitously, and then dies. Still to this day, we don't know, because the tests at that level, if tests could determine a level of positivity at 200 copies, back then it was copies per volume of fluid. If the test was positive as 2,000, that means at 1890 it was negative. And so nowadays that test would have been clearly positive, and you know, she never saw her, never saw her husband again. I mean, that's how this whole thing started. So I looked at this personally and I said, this is our medical Super Bowl, and we better see some action. And we better see some mass casualty units, places like University of Michigan and Beaumont and Baylor. Boy, they better start to have field hospitals and start treating people. Otherwise, we're going to have a ton of people being admitted to the hospital. Where's the field hospitals? Where are they? Wait a minute, then things started happening. Patients started getting sick. They started calling their doctors. The doctors say, well, there's no treatment. We can't treat this problem. We don't treat it. You know, and then patients started, this is the first time in my life that I've ever seen doctors not treat a problem. And my interpretation was it was out of fear. That, oh, let's not get our offices contaminated. We don't know how to treat this. Let's not get our waiting rooms. I was on a lot of these tactical calls for our center, and the calls went something like this. Where do we get enough masks to protect ourselves? Where do we get enough hazmat suits to protect ourselves? These discussions were just absolutely horrifying to hear. And it became clear within a month or two that the biomedical complex was not going to treat. It was clear. Where was the field hospital in Ann Arbor? I never saw it. Or how about Michigan State? Or how about Beaumont? No. It became this situation, and it became memorialized actually on October 8th of last year, where the National Institutes of Health said the treatment standards are that nobody gets treatment, nobody, until they get sick enough and they can't breathe, and then they come in the hospital, and then even then they don't get a milligram of treatment, and only when they get on oxygen. And when we figure this out, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for a senior citizen to get that sick and end up, and by that time the virus is long gone. So something got into the minds of doctors and nurses and others and everyone to not treat me, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. And so I worked feverishly, and I had a lot of colleagues in Italy, and we worked on this day and night, what's working, what's not working. And as we arrived at our conclusions based on what we had, we said, listen, we can't wait for large randomized trials. The ivory tower doctors were saying, listen, well, we must wait for large randomized trials, which take 2 to 5 years. I mean, that's a long time. That's a lot of people dying over 2 to 5 years, quote, waiting for randomized trials. And when it became clear, the National Institutes of Health were not going to do any treatment trials of people in the community. The NIH only had 1 treatment trial, 1. And they outfitted all the centers. They were going to use 2 simple drugs. They outfitted all the centers. They had it set up. They said, ready, set, go, I think in May. And then by June 4th, they shut it down. They said, no, we can't find any patients. No patients? We were swimming in patients. What do you mean no patients? So that to this day, there has been no earnest effort to try to treat Americans in some type of high-quality, well-funded, randomized trial to prevent hospitalization and death.